Shall I go ahead and call the meeting to order? Okay, the meeting of the Bylaws and Policy Committee is called to order at 10:01 a.m. Beth, could you please do the roll call?
Bunnell?
Here.
Davis?
Here.
Jakaki, am I pronouncing that correctly, Leslie?
Yes.
Did I get that? Okay, I'll probably continue to butcher it through the meeting. I apologize.
It's fine.
Novak
Here.
and Smith.
Here.
For CCS, we have Rebecca Malinowski, Deborah Wishmeyer, and Beth Stoneberg.
Thank you. Any additions to the agenda? Okay, any public comment? Okay, I always feel like I never wait long enough, so then I wait a long time. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the November 12th, 2019 meeting.
I move.
Thank you, Joe. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Scott. Any proposed changes? Okay, all in favor?
Oh, I can do
Aye.
roll call for this.
Oh, you will, roll call. Okay, thank you, Beth.
Bunnell?
Aye.
Davis?
Yes.
Jakaki?
Yes.
Novak?
Yes.
and Smith. Heidi?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next up on the agenda is the bylaws review recommendation. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing the red line comment version. Is there any context you'd like to provide before we begin a discussion?
We talked about some of this content well over a year ago, about a year and a half ago. And then we were just going to be reviewing the attorney changes back in March of 2020. So that did not happen for all the reasons you already know. So most of the updates or all of the updates in here are really just updating language or things that Dennis felt were missing. In our last meeting, we talked a lot about like the designated alternative representative, or like that the library could have more than one alternate if needed, and that they would be able to vote. I'm happy to go through the changes where anyone has questions or comments, but I do need from the committee a determination on voting on the budget because there are two clauses that conflict. So one area of the bylaws says that the budget needs to be passed with a 2/3 vote of all members. And another part of the bylaw says it needs to be passed with a 2/3 vote of the members present at the meeting where it's presented. So we just need a determination from the committee on what that should be. Membership and other things are 2/3 of all members, so I feel like that's the most consistent. But I am fine either way if we feel like there would be a concern about getting like attendance and quorum and getting the budget passed at some point.
Can I ask a question about attendance? Is there generally a problem with attendance? I think I only went to one meeting of the governing board before the plague hit us. So, is it common that many people don't show up, that there'd be a real issue?
No, in general, we have pretty strong attendance. The only time I was actually worried was in January of, God, was it 2019? We were approving Indian trails and we needed a 2/3 vote, and it was a snowstorm. And we didn't have remote options available because it was pre-COVID. But other than that, I have never been to a governing board meeting where I was concerned about quorum. I guess this would be more than quorum, but it's unusual that we have more than a couple of absences.
Can I ask, is this a parliamentary question? Could this be answered by talking to somebody? I know Alex was our designated parliamentarian. He and I had a conversation a year or so ago along similar lines, should a motion pass, if you have a 7-member board and you have a quorum, but say only 4 people show up, 2 of them vote yes, 1 abstains, 1 doesn't vote. Are 2 votes enough to pass a motion, or do you need at least a quorum of, you know, the number of people do you need for a quorum? Or is it, I mean, how do we determine, is it 2/3 of the people there or 2/3 of everyone? Do we have that choice? Do we have the ability to make that choice, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, in the bylaws, we can specify. So whatever's in the bylaws would rule, I guess. And then whatever's not specified in the bylaws, we say we follow Robert's rules. So if Robert's rule says one thing and our bylaws say another, our bylaws win. And I think in either case here, we'd be looking still for 2/3 of members. I think it is probably, again, more consistent to say 2/3 of all members. And then we avoid any potential problems that Scott described.
I think that's a good idea. One, because it's consistent, which makes it easier. The other thing is, if you don't even get enough people on the budget vote, if there's not enough people, do you know what I'm saying? What some would say arguably is the most important vote of the year, and you're not even getting enough people there, then maybe there shouldn't be a vote that day. Do you know what I mean? If there is the apocalypse comes, then maybe that's not a good voting day. Do you know, does that make sense?
Absolutely, Joe. So, you know, in terms of consistency, I think keeping 2/3 of members present. And then in terms of Scott's question, I think this is the most inclusive interpretation, like of the 2/3. It's 2/3 of membership. So unless there are any objections from the team to going with 2/3 of membership, we could move on to the next facet of the bylaws. Any thoughts?
Do we know what Robert's rules does say? I mean, like, what's the rule of thumb that they recommend? Is there one?
My understanding is it just says 2/3. It doesn't specify. But I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, I know there has to be 2/3 for a budget vote, but the issue is
2/3 of what?
you have what?
Right.
Yeah. I can look it up, but it's probably not fast. So voting in election.
Well, why don't we move on, and then we could always circle back, Joe, when you found it.
Okay.
Does that work?
Okay.
Rebecca, any other highlights that you'd like to review with us?
I would point out that the attorney added a new article that on my version is on page 27, which is really a liability sort of disclaimer. So, I mean, we didn't ask for this. It's just something that he suggested. And it's not something we previously discussed. I have no problem with it. But I did want to point out that he was just sort of like, here's a thing. It's his job.
So it's on page 27 and 28, Article 13, liability. I didn't see any problem with this. I thought it made a lot of sense. I love indemnification of me. So any thoughts on this one, gang?
I think it sounds like pretty standard language whenever you're working with a third party, which, you know, CCS is for us. So I think it just makes sense for them to cover themselves.
I just wondered why it was necessary if we have officer and liability insurance already. I wasn't sure. I thought we were covered in that regard. I've not seen anyone say we should have extra. I guess it doesn't hurt to have it, but I thought we were already covered in that regard.
I mean, we do have like, well, it's not a separate policy anymore, but we are covered through LIRA for our board members and officers. I feel like it's belt and suspenders. Like, if we have an issue, we're gonna work with our attorney. We're gonna work with our insurance. Hopefully we won't have an issue.
Well, and it doesn't really cost us anything to add the suspenders here, and maybe we'll look real nice with both.
As long as they're not rainbow or,
Can't make
penalties.
no promises, Scott. So if there are no additional questions or comments on this, we could go ahead with accepting this additional article. Oh, Scott?
Just, are we talking about the bylaws in general? If we had any questions about some of the language right now,
I was just talking about Article 13.
or just that specific? Okay.
Yeah, if there's anything more on that one, we'll go with the added suspenders. And then, yes, any other questions about the bylaws?
Yeah, I have a quick question. This is regarding Article 3, Section 4 for removal. I know that was it's a significant increase in words, and I'm just wondering, did we have a particular problem that I'm not aware of? I thought, gee, I don't think we have had a problem, but it looks like we're trying to remove a senator or something.
No, this was another area where Dennis made a suggestion. He felt that our language on removal, which was previously just we can remove someone whenever we want to, and by we I mean you, the governing board. So he put in some language about what that would potentially look like, or why someone would need to be removed. I don't know if it's because of maybe like the Downers Grove situation that it was kind of like on his mind. He certainly reviewed our bylaws before and not had a problem with this. But no, I have no plans to remove anyone, nor have I ever heard of anyone else asking about it.
It sounds like it's the kind of language that applies to the very contentious boards, you know what I'm saying? Like, that are fighting all the time and people want to throw each other off the board, and, like there's a definition of what cause is, but librarians always get along with one another, so. It's a little
Not sure
overkill,
about
but
the-
it covers the bases. All right, I'm not doing well here.
And Scott, I'm sorry, I didn't get your comment.
I'm sorry, I had a question about the getting rid of someone for any cause. That one is troublesome to me. Is that just because somebody, we don't like them, or they're jerky? We don't like the way they behave? If they're elected,
Where are you seeing that?
because it says, for the purposes of this section, let's see.
Page
Removal.
13.
First sentence of removal, section 4, page 13. Any officer may be removed from his or her office for cause by a majority vote, blah, 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 or for any reason by a 2/3 vote. So if we have enough people that don't like you, we can get you out of office, even if you didn't do anything for cause. It specifically says we should add, the attorney says it would be a good idea to add.
Yeah.
I don't know,
mean-
is anyone else uncomfortable with getting rid of somebody for no reason, for no cause?
So a majority if for cause, 2/3 if for no cause.
I don't care if
Right.
it's 4/5 for no cause. Why would we be getting rid of somebody for no cause? That just doesn't seem the
I don't
librarian
know.
way.
I could go either way on this. I would also just point out, it's just removing an officer from their role as an officer. It's not removing them from the board itself, because the bylaws also say that every library has the director on governing board. So it wouldn't be kicking someone off the board. It would be removing them from an officer role. So again, I could go either way.
Well,
wanna
my
go
other
with-
question is this a common clause? Is this something that every organization has? Because I've never seen it before, so I'm curious if we've been missing the boat for a long time. It
Yeah,
just seems kind of heavy-handed to me.
again,
but-
our previous clause was just that anyone could be removed by the electing or appointing body whenever it's in the best interest of CCS, which was pretty vague. So Dennis, in general, does use a lot of standard language from client to client. So I would not be surprised if this or very similar language appears in other bylaws, but I did not specifically ask about it.
I think this day and age, to not have a removal. I mean, while we're looking at right now, we would have no one we would, but this just protects us in the future. We don't know who, could be, or what people's motives are in the future for CCS or for libraries. I know, yeah, the any reason is concerning, but I think having a removal section that's pretty defined. I know a lot of libraries have gotten stuck with board members who aren't doing their job because they don't have a removal policy in their bylaws. So I think it's a good thing for us to have in there. I do share the concern about any reason.
So one possibility that we're discussing, and Rebecca said she was, either way might be acceptable. We could potentially keep the additions as noted, but remove the section about any reason by 2/3. So we could keep that a majority could remove from office for cause, which then is elaborated on, but remove the for any reason section. What are your thoughts on that?
Cause includes conduct that is, would cause substantial harm to CCS. So isn't that kind of what we're talking about? The no reason or any reason would be because it's detrimental to CCS? That seems sufficiently broad.
Yeah, I again, am fine if we take it out. My argument in favor of it in favor of keeping it would be, do we then have to prove cause? Like, let's say we remove someone from the role of treasurer because they were doing all sorts of public racism or something. And so half of our members voted to remove them for cause. And, then they say, well, my racism or my cool jokes on the internet do not negatively affect the reputation of CCS. It's not against any policy. So I'm going to fight this and it's going to be a whole big thing. Whereas if the bylaws say 2/3 for any reason, we don't really have to argue with this hypothetical person about whether or not their racist comments on the internet affect CCS or not. So that would be my argument in favor. Again, I think it's a highly unlikely situation that we would get to that point. But does the 2/3 vote by any reason just give us some more protection that we wouldn't have like contested? Like, I don't know what would happen if someone contested, like, well, I'm still the president, you can't remove me. I don't know.
Thoughts on this context that Rebecca's provided?
Well, if somebody was going to sue, they're going to sue, and it doesn't matter. They would just sue and say that your clause is not legal or was violating their rights. So I don't think anyone's going to sue to get back on the CCS executive committee. I think it is a highly unlikely event. I might sue to get off, but not to get on. But
Yeah,
no,
you
I'm
would
kidding.
not. You would love executive committee.
I've served my time. But I don't want to be a roadblock in this discussion. I just, it's a pretty big term there, pretty broad term. So.
Well, and to
Whatever.
Scott's point, I'm sorry to cut you off, Scott, but to your point in that second paragraph, it does say, but is not limited to. And if we're concerned that cause means you need to provide a certain amount of proof, perhaps when we have the definition of cause in the section below, cause as determined by the majority of the board, not limited to. Do you know what I mean? Like, we decide what cause, we decide if it's cause with that vote. If there's any way to say that and be protected, but not have this any member 2/3.
I mean, that's a solution, including but not limited, famous legal words. You know,
Right.
including but not limited, and then list all the reasons for cause. And then get
And-
rid of the no cause clause. Is that what you're thinking, Heidi?
Yeah, we have the, but is not limited to. So I would, I don't know if this is, legally covering enough, but perhaps something that says cause as determined by the voting majority, including but not limited to, because then it's, well, it says in the bylaws, if it's cause, if we say it's cause, there doesn't need to be proof. And then, then we could take it out. But I don't know if that really provides anything extra. So few options here. One, we approve it as is, as presented. Two, we remove just that statement about for any reason by 2/3. Three, we remove that statement and maybe try to add something to provide a broader definition of cause if the team feels it's necessary. What do you think? 1, 2, or 3? 3, Joe is saying.
I'm just saying, Scott, I mean, I understand Scott's comment in the sense that it looks just nasty, like, look, we can kick you off for all these legitimate reasons. And then if we don't like you, we can kick you off, So,
Sure.
I mean, it seems, I understand sort of, it just, it reads bad, doesn't it? Like, we don't like you, so I think your 3, Heidi, your broadening of what cause is, so to speak, solves that problem. Because we can still do it if we just don't sound nasty.
I'm happy with the language the way it is. I mean, this has been prepared by an attorney. Our own legal counsel has prepared this. Quite honestly, if someone is nasty and I don't like them, I wouldn't mind having an option to get rid of them. I mean, necessarily need, cause to do that. I just want to get rid of them. So, I mean, if that gives us that option, great. I don't have a problem with it because, I don't think that we're going to get rid of somebody, because of their color of their skin. You know what I mean? I mean, if we go that far, we have bigger problems. But if we want to get rid of somebody because we feel that they're not doing the job, great. The attorney seems to think that that's okay language. I'm good with option number 1, approving as written.
Okay. Any other comments?
I just have not about the removal section, but just overall, I didn't know if you guys were going to review and try to make a gender neutral language in the bylaws instead of using all the he, she's. This would be a good time as we're maybe looking at the bylaws to take advantage of that change. That's, more and more places are looking at in their bylaws or policies.
I fully support that use of they, them instead of.
Yeah, I can update that. I have no problem.
Is there a
Wonderful.
find replace function that you can use?
Yes.
It's going to take you a while to get through all the docs.
Yeah,
And-
I can control F my way through this baby.
Wonderful. And just to circle back to the removal, we had, several options in play. Is there a consensus of the committee behind option 1? You do a show, just give me a wave if you support option 1, which was keep it as is. Okay, we've got Frank.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
And
fine.
Leslie.
All right, I'll go if we can get
Okay.
majority.
It looks like we
I
have
plan
a
on being on the
consensus.
executive board, being really nasty to push this thing and see how far it goes.
Make sure
Ooh, I
Frank's
like
on with you, so he can vote you off.
Okay, so we'll leave section 4 removal as is presented. Thank you all. Thank you, Rebecca. Any other sections of the bylaws that you'd want to draw our attention to, or any sections that anyone else would like to bring up?
I have 2 stupid things just to make this meeting longer. I just have a question on page 3. It's like the opening sentence and it says that CCS is a body politic and a corporate. What does that mean?
I don't know.
Page
I don't-
3?
Yeah, it's right in the beginning and it defines CCS. Do you see it as a body politic and a corporate?
Body politic and corporate.
I thought we were an intergovernmental instrumentality created by these ideas.
A body politic is a people of a nation, state, or society considered collectively as an organized group of citizens.
And what's a corporate? Is a noun. Corporate is a noun,
A legal entity.
Legal entity.
not a corporation, a corporate.
Yeah,
Oh,
legal
great.
entity.
Legal entity.
Okay. And the other thing is on page 18, the bylaws allow for committees to form, but it does not allow for a bylaws committee to form. Does that matter? You see, it's like finance and budget and long-range planning. Are we another animal or does it even matter?
We've gotten an including but not limited to there. So if in the future we didn't want to have a bylaws and policy committee, and say executive committee reviews bylaws and policy, we'd have that option.
We could do it. Okay.
Okay. And just to make sure we have closure there on being a body politic and corporate, are there any suggestions that that be changed? Or are we firm with that now?
I think that just looking at like the Google, I think body is modifying both politic and corporate. So we're a body politic and a body corporate, because a body corporate is an entity. So I think that's why it feels like it should say corporation, but that body is modifying both of those.
All right.
Do we have a legal?
I don't.
Is there a legal definition of what we are? Because isn't that kind of what this is trying to say? Like every resolution we pass, the attorney language says, whereas the Fremont Public Library District is a library district by the Library District Act 1991 in Lake County. It's just that kind of definition. Do we have a legal definition of what we are that a layperson would understand?
That a layperson would understand? Probably not. Under Article 2, Section 1, General Powers, Dennis also added that CCS is established pursuant to the Illinois Constitution, Article 7, Section 10, and the Intergovernmental Cooperation Act, ILCS 2020/1.
So like the legal definition of a body politic is a term applied to a corporation which is usually designated as a body, corporate, and politic. The term is particularly appropriate to a public corporation invested with powers and duties of the government. It is often used in a rather loose way to designate the state or nation of a sovereign power or government of a county or municipality without distinctly connoting any express or individual corporate character. So it's like CCS wouldn't exist without us.
Okay.
I think
Nice.
we need a flag.
Deborah, Member Services is on it.
And they
At least
can
a signal.
match, we can match the suspenders to it'll be great. Okay. Any other thoughts on the bylaws, please?
I had two small things and one maybe bigger, if I may.
Please.
On section 2, page 4, we state that no later than September 1st, 2007. Can we strike that? Because that's just where we are now. Everybody has a designation, a designee. Or is I section 2, page 4?
Yes, I see.
No later than September 1st and as needed thereafter, each member library shall appoint its said librarian to act as September 1st, 2007 was a long time ago. Can we strike that?
And just say each member shall.
Yeah.
I like it. Anybody
Okay.
else?
Then I had a small thing on section 3, page 5. We talk about that we shall meet a minimum of 4 meetings at least once each quarter. But we struck out that we shall meet no less frequently than once each quarter. So I don't know, 4 times a year and at least once each quarter, or did we just really spelling out what a quarter means? I just seemed extra verbiage. I wasn't quite following why.
I don't have a reason except in general, this is like his style. I
Okay,
mean, all of the documents we get from him, like I can send him 3 sentences and I can get back a page and a half.
that's not uncommon, yeah.
So
Okay.
Paid by the word.
Sometimes we may bleed and have 2 in the one quarter and none in the next quarter because of a meeting, you know, that kind of. Okay, all right, a bigger thing potentially then is on remote meetings, section 6, page 9. And the whole idea about allowing members to participate remotely. We haven't, perhaps we need to take a fresh look at the modifications to the Open Meeting Act that came about as a result of the pandemic, and how the board president of an entity can declare that it's impracticable to hold the meeting in person, such as the meeting we're in right now, and therefore you have some special steps that they can set up that it kind of loosens why you might have a remote meeting. So I don't know if anybody looked at that or tried to incorporate any of those changes, and maybe put in the sentence about the executive officer may determine that holding an in-person meeting is impracticable and is declaring that it's going to be a remote meeting.
Or even referring to emergency, emergency alterations to the Open Meetings Act, maybe.
Yeah, so I'm sorry I don't have exact language to suggest right now, but I think we should probably just read and make sure we're compliant. I was a little surprised the attorney didn't
he
mention
reviewed
anything.
this last year.
Oh, that's right. Okay, maybe he needs to review that section then to incorporate those things. I know we had our attorney look at what do we put on the minutes or on the agenda, I mean, to make sure that people understand this is officially declared a remote meeting, and now everything's a roll call vote and all that stuff, or a voice vote, I mean. No, roll call, yeah.
Roll call, yeah. So yes, I think that we need to address that. My hesitation in specifically referring to the Open Meetings Act is like, we're not like, we're mostly compliant with the Open Meetings Act, but not 100%. Or someone could argue that we're not 100%. We live in our weird gray area. But I do think
But we
should
mirror it.
address. Pardon?
We mirror it, right? We in most cases, we pretty much follow whatever we as individuals have to do for OMA. In the lack of there being any kind of definition from the Attorney General about what we are, we then have chosen to follow the conservative course of just mirroring that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't give meeting notice the way that the Open Meeting Act requires. Like, we don't post physically in a public place that we're having a meeting. So there's some like small things that we don't do, but like in general, like our meetings are open, we take our minutes, we do our recordings, we do our record keeping, we follow the vote, quorum, etc. I would be interested in tabling this specific section and having, I think we're going to have some conversations, as things begin to reopen. I think we talked about it, maybe I only talked about it with Sarah and not actually at executive committee, but like, if we are, like, maybe CCS would choose to have governing board meetings in person, but regardless of the state of any disaster in Illinois, try to have committee meetings remotely. Our attendance with committee meetings has been a lot better during the pandemic than when we have them in person. And I think just cutting down on that travel time has been really valuable. So I'd like to talk more broadly about remote meetings and OMA, et cetera, before we make changes or send this to the attorney.
Okay.
That's
Any-
fair.
sounds
Could
like
we
you
also,
can-
when you're having those discussions, talk about the feasibility of hybrid meetings?
Yes.
We haven't figured out a good way to do that yet, and I'm going to have my first in-person board meeting next week. And I don't know if they're all going to feel comfortable coming,
Mhm.
but hybrid is tough. Programmers are working on it too.
Yes.
Mm.
May I ask a question? So CCS does not have to follow the exact laws as the member libraries, because we all have to follow OMA. And we're obviously under the new laws, the executive laws, and the Attorney General guidances about remote meetings, but CCS does not have to do that. Is that what you're saying, Rebecca? I just didn't know that, because I
Yeah.
don't know what a body politic is.
It's a mystery. So we've asked our attorneys for so both CCS and SWAN, and I'm sure other consortia have asked our attorneys for their opinion, and our attorneys are like,
We don't know. Okay.
If you want to be safe, follow OMA. We have not me personally, but multiple times requested a ruling from the public access counselor on whether we need to follow OMA and FOIA, and they've declined to make a ruling and said, well, if you wanted to have someone like a friend sue you and take it to court, then we can figure it out. So that's what.
It's a gray area. Okay, well, they didn't say, yes, you have to. They didn't say we had to.
Right.
So, all right. Okay.
Yeah, the public access counselor didn't say, oh, you absolutely have to. So we're like,
okay, thank you.
yeah.
Okay, sounds great. Scott, I don't know if did we resolve the question about the quarterly meeting? Were you proposing that it just say?
Yeah, no,
amended
it's
in the
just, that's
quarterly?
from the Department of Redundancy Department. I'm fine with that.
Okay, okay, great. All right, any other spots for consideration? All right, wonderful. So Rebecca, do you need a vote on this from us?
Yes, we need a recommendation to governing board to accept the bylaws.
To accept the bylaws as revised. I would entertain that motion. Anybody?
I will move to accept the bylaws as revised.
Thank you, Joe.
Second,
Thank you, Scott. Beth, will you do the roll call?
Yes. Cornell,
Aye.
Davis,
yes.
Chakecki,
Yes.
Novak,
Yes.
Heidi.
Did you say so?
I
I'm
did.
sorry. That's the second time it cuts out on me. I'll just say aye after Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the parental leave policy recommendation. Thank you for the draft as well as the survey information, Rebecca. Any other additional context you'd like to provide?
I can talk a little bit about how I got to 6 weeks or how I developed the policy, but I will. So after my announcement in January, both Scott and a couple of other directors were like, "Oh, well, what's our paid leave policy?" I'm like, "Oh, we don't have one." So per their suggestions, I did draft this. This would actually not go to governing board. This would go to executive committee as the personnel committee, and now also under our new decision-making structure, executive committee approves policy. So I just want to be upfront about that at this time.
Is that even if the policy has financial implications, it doesn't have to be crossed against a budget?
Yeah, I mean, it's just specific to policy. And they also, executive committee has a history of approving employee policy as well, like updating the employee handbook, such as I don't want to lie. Beth, did executive committee approve the personal cell phone use reimbursement? That didn't go to governing board, right? So they've made some other financial decisions as well. So in talking with a couple directors, there was a discussion about how much leave would you want to give, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And I thought it was a really interesting comment someone made, which was you don't want to give too much because, if multiple people need to use the leave at the same time, you're going to be in a real pickle. The flip side of that, I think, is that as an employer who strives to, protect our employees' wellness as much as we can, I would encourage any of my team, regardless of, if 3 people needed to use the leave at once, to take, as much leave as they were able to. We are not bound by FMLA, but we have a history of adhering to FMLA. Because we're small, we don't have to do it, but it feels like the right thing to do. So whether or not a parental leave policy passes, I would encourage any employee in a situation where they needed to care for themselves or a loved one to take a full 12 weeks off. So then to me, it becomes a question of equity. Like, if this policy doesn't pass, I'm going to take 12 weeks off and I'll pay for it with PTO. And if I need to take unpaid leave, I can afford to take unpaid leave. But I wouldn't want an employee who, is at a lower level or maybe on a single income to feel restricted on how much leave they can take due to financial constraints up to that 12 weeks. So looking at how much leave we already offer and looking at what other libraries put together, my proposal is 6 weeks of paid parental leave, because it's sort of like CCS pays half with this parental leave, and then you pay half with your, of this like 12 weeks, then the employee would pay half with their existing PTO, or if they need to take unpaid leave. So the policy itself, I pulled a lot of language from our pals over at Skokie, which it seems like a lot of you did as well. I also used some language from Scott's policy and from HR Source. But this has not yet been reviewed by HR Source. If you do recommend it to executive committee, I would send it to HR Source before the next executive committee meeting.
Just speaking of, you mentioned that you took the language from other places. That would make sense why you mentioned a lot of times they work for the library or the needs of the library.
Yes,
So maybe
I'll fix
just
that.
cleaning that up. Yep.
Do a lot of copy paste. I'll get that, Leslie.
Sounds good. Does anyone have any recommended changes to the proposed policy?
I have a question. I think it's a great idea, number one, but this issue came up with somebody else's parental leave about when you're taking your designated time. Are you taking it immediately after giving birth or the adoption, or do you have up to a year to take it? And there was an issue about that in this other context, I know, because people, like the employer, wanted to have predictability to, figure out leave. So they didn't want people to have a whole year to take it. They wanted to limit it to closer to birth or adoption. And I was just, because this one seems to go out a whole year. And I have a question about that, or what's the rationale behind that?
Yeah, so I saw 12 months, and I also saw 6 months in the policies that I reviewed. I went with 12 months just to be consistent with FMLA. Like the 12 weeks that FMLA would grant you would be within like a 12-month period. In terms of requiring the leave to be taken immediately at like the birth or adoption, in the event, like in my situation, for example, I will be taking my leave immediately because I need it, but my partner will be splitting his leave. So he'll be taking some at the beginning with me and then extending the time that someone is home with the baby by taking time after I go back to work. So having that flexibility, I think, is nice. I agree 12 months is probably unnecessary. Scott, I think your policy is 6 months. Is that correct?
No, ours is, okay, ours says paid parental leave must be taken in full within 6 months following the birth or adoption. So yeah, there is a little bit of a cap on it, but I'll tell you that since we instituted this policy 2 years ago, 5 people, 2 that have had 2 kids, and 1 is having her first kid. So I'm not going to say it triggered a baby boom, but I will say that there are some staff members who have been able to take advantage of this policy and has engendered them to the library very strongly. They're really feeling good about it. And now 2 of them is kind of simultaneous. I got a department head and a youth librarian who are overlapping and another youth librarian about to go when one comes back. So you may have those situations, but life happens. Whether you have this policy or not, you'd be facing the same thing of
Yes.
staff members that are having their lives disrupted and changed around due to the kids. If anything, the taking it within 6 months, I look at some maybe compromise because I also wanted to give 8 weeks. And but those of us that have had kids, you understand that a lot of things come up over that first year, and the ability to take the leave intermittently really helps out your employee. And if I may too, that's why we picked 8 weeks, because we thought we give you 4 weeks of vacation time. You may have already used up all your sick time before you had the baby with all your other wellness visits, or if you had any complications leading up to the birth. And then to then come out of it with 0 days in your pocket is another challenge. So we don't make you bleed everything dry beforehand, and hopefully we bridge you with the time you have accrued to when you come back. And so far it's been pretty good for us.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Scott said, I appreciate the consistency and the concept of half your time and half the library time, but I prefer the 8 weeks. If we could include that to the recommendation to the executive committee. Are there anyone object to changing the 6 weeks to 8 weeks for the executive committee's consideration? I don't see any. Okay. And then in terms of the time limit, because that time would be taken intermittently, and I'm just remembering back a decade to my own personal experience, I really like the 12 months. And, I can see, where the 6 month, but I think that additional flexibility, given the fact that it's parental leave and not simply maternity leave, and that it could be taken intermittently, I think is solid. Any other thoughts, gang? I don't mean to just force my opinion down your throat, but I was sitting here wanting to share it with you.
Oh, Heidi, I think you brought up something else important that I didn't really think of. We think about baby care, but the stress is on the parents, and if the mother has any postpartum issues, that extra time can be really valuable. I mean, even life-saving. So
100%.
Well, I think, Heidi, the point you made that makes sense to me, you're like, it's not maternity leave, it's parental leave. So I think that when you look at it in that perspective, that the longer period of time to take the leave intermittently or not makes sense, because it involves the other parent, so to speak, the non-birthing parent, and that can help too.
Yes.
I do have a question about the compensation and benefits. It's just not outlined. Will they continue to accrue their PTO during that paid time leave or not?
Yes, like while the employee is being paid, they would continue to accrue time just like if they were on a vacation.
Okay.
But then if they were to take unpaid time, like if they took 8 weeks of paid and 4 weeks of unpaid, they would not accrue during the unpaid time.
It does look like under compensation and benefits, it's included in the second paragraph, I think, because I was looking for that also.
Well, it says,
Oh, yeah, including extensions of paid time.
okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, no, that's not. Oh,
That's how I interpreted it, unless I interpreted that incorrectly.
I just took it as that one I took that CCS will continue to pay like their portion of the employer portion of health insurance, IMRF contributions type of.
If that was changed from CCS will continue to pay its portion of the cost of employee benefits, blah, blah, blah. If that was changed to like the employee will continue to be eligible for all CCS benefits during their paid time.
Including, you
Yeah,
know, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Including the accrual of benefits, you're saying,
And
Yeah.
you don't,
health coverage, yeah.
Including PTO accrual and
I believe that's FMLA law too. So if you're mirroring FMLA, that's consistent.
So including, well, I mean, all regular benefits.
Yeah,
Maybe it doesn't even need to get specific.
I think the only thing that would change, and I don't know that we need to list it, is so we get, because if our staff members have on-call responsibilities, they get a stipend for phone and internet, even outside of the pandemic. So if they were on leave, they wouldn't be using their phone and internet for work, so they wouldn't be eligible for that benefit. But I don't know if that's a benefit so much as an adherence to state law.
the latter, adherence to state law.
Okay, so the employee will continue to be eligible for all CCS benefits while the employee is on paid leave. Period. Is that sufficient?
I think so. I mean, it covers all, so any other thoughts, guys? Sorry, I keep calling you guys. Committee?
Call us a body politic, please.
Any comments from the body politic and corporate?
No comments.
Okay.
So the only
good to-
comment the only comment I have is that this is going to be state law soon enough. So it's good for us to get ahead on the curve.
That's exciting.
It might be, the state law might be more generous than this. We'll see what happens.
Well, then we'll step up. I'm going to steal this for Highland Park too. Okay, so
I have one quick question for you, and that is under requesting leave, it's the last sentence where we're talking about, what the request should include, and it includes any documentation supporting your need for leave. Do we need to define that a little bit better at all, or do we care? Or, I mean, in other words, are you asking for a birth certificate?
No, this was language from another policy. Some places had a form to fill out. I could find a form and we could use an existing form. I mean, we've pulled FMLA paperwork from HR Source before. I don't know. I guess I'm interested in what others are doing. Because again, I mean, like for the birthing parent, like it's pretty clear. But for a non-birthing parent, like they wouldn't need to go to a medical professional to like request a doctor's note for FMLA paperwork. Scott?
I think it's more for adoption.
Oh, okay.
You don't just have the nephew living with you for a while, something like that, I guess. Yeah, you could say, well, we do need to see proof of this.
Yeah, adoption or foster care, right? Would foster care fall under here? So.
that's a
If
good
you were
question.
pregnant before you left for
I
a
didn't
week
think
and you came
foster
back
care
and you're not
did fall
pregnant
under
anymore and you look really tired, I'm gonna assume you had the baby. We don't need any more proof after that.
That's the documentation.
Yeah, I do not believe that foster care would be covered by this policy. If there is a state law that passes or something changes to that effect, we would update it. But at this time, it would just be adoption or birth.
Okay. So any proposed changes to that verbiage, or could that go to the executive committee as stated here? Okay, any other comments or suggestions? So what action do you need from us, Rebecca, please?
A recommendation to executive committee to approve the parental leave policy.
I would entertain that motion.
Do we want to As revised though? based
Yes,
on-
As revised.
revised.
Revised. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
I'll
Will
move.
someone make, oh, thank you, Scott. Second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Frank. And Beth, the roll?
Bunnell,
Yes.
Davis,
Yes.
Takaki,
Yes.
Novak,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes. All right, excellent. Click back to the agenda here. Okay, now we have our policies discussion. And the first on the list is the vendor data handling policy. And I do remember us speaking about this previously. Thank you for sending the information, Rebecca. Want to provide any context for us for the discussion?
Yes. So for everything in section 8, this is not anything I'm asking for action for today, but in general, like guidance on do we or don't we want to do a thing. So we last talked about the vendor data handling policy like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we talked about it at governing board. We got some feedback from the IT group. And the biggest concern was like, does the agreement, like does CCS go out and like get these agreements signed from vendors, or are libraries responsible for getting the agreement and like sharing it with CCS so CCS can like monitor? I've had a lot of time to think about this, and in general, I have practical and logistic concerns about this. Oftentimes, the first time we hear that a library is, like has questions about a new product, it's because they've already signed a contract with a vendor. So what do we do if a library has signed a contract with a vendor and then the vendor is like, I'm not signing this like data handling agreement with CCS. Like I already got paid. Like I'm done. So I was thinking about potential alternatives, which could be that CCS provides a sample rider that libraries could request that any vendor add to their contract, but there wouldn't be any enforcement of use there. So CCS would be promoting these ideas of privacy and patron handling, but it wouldn't necessarily be consistent library to library. Or alternately, CCS provides just some sort of like general watch outs. Like here are the things that like are common to want to change in the contract. Like the vendors are going to say they can use your data for R&D, but like you can just strike that out. Again, you all have your own attorneys, so I don't know how, like if every, agreement that you sign with a vendor for a product is going through your attorney. Or again, we can like figure out the logistic hurdles and say CCS is going to do some sort of centralized process with this and require companies to sign these agreements. So I kind of wanted to get your general feedback on that, knowing that it's been a long time since we last talked about it. And it feels fresh.
I have a question. This is what I was thinking of. If less than all, whether CCS does it or member libraries do it, if less than all the libraries do this, protect themselves in some way, isn't the underlying like patron information always vulnerable? If Scott does it and protects his patron information, but I don't, can't somebody use Scott's information through me, so to speak, because I have a lot of Scott's information because we're sharing the database. You know what I mean? Does it work if less than all adhere to it?
Yeah, I think the answer is it depends. So when we're looking at products like Collection HQ or Edelweiss, these like analytics products where we're sending files out, we're only sending the content specific to your library. There may be some like wiggle room in there about like holds data, since that's like patron, like you could have holds data from multiple libraries. So those vendors don't have access directly into our database. For vendors that do have access to our database, it's generally through SIP or API. So a patron has to, or something has to initiate the lookup in the system. Like the vendor can't just like log into the system and browse all the data.
Mhm.
Like something has to say, go get the information about this patron using this ID. So the patron would have to be using the service that you provide. So if like you signed the agreement and patrons from Niles were at your library using the service, they'd be protected under your agreement. But if like Niles didn't sign the agreement and they're using the service through Niles at the Niles library through the Niles connection, they may not be protected. But that, and like if your patrons are over at Niles, like depending on how it's written, they may not be protected. It would be like through your connection.
Right.
So
Depending on the product, sometimes that is true, sometimes not. Okay.
Yeah. Deborah, do you agree with that in general, with like how the connections work?
I'm not as familiar with API integration and tools that would integrate via the API, but you're correct with SIP that it's a call and retrieve response. So a patron tries to access a resource, the call is sent to the database, and then that information is passed back to the vendor. With API integration, I'm not as confident that I understand what a vendor could be able to retrieve via that integration. I know that API isn't necessarily partitioned, but I'm not as familiar with that. So that might be a question for IT.
Yeah. We actually, when McHenry was adding a new service that like didn't have, like they were like the first library to use this Curiosity Stream service.
You no longer have it.
No longer have it, but we spent a lot of time talking with Innovative about like, well, what can they do if we give them API? And they confirmed it's not browsable. So like there still is like a call component. So I can confirm that part, at least for Innovative. There may be other, I'm sure there are other API options where you can browse through, but Innovative's API is limited in that way.
If I can, my overriding thought of this policy is it's like completely unenforceable, and how would we ever get a vendor to agree to sign this? Are we ready then to not use their product if they don't sign this? And even if they do sign it, you're going to get some salesmen to sign it. Who's going to sign it on their behalf and actually hold them to it? It reminds me of years ago when Comcast was going around trying to get everybody to get to switch over for internet. But if you really read their policy, it had all kinds of claims that we had to monitor access. We're like, this is public internet. We're not going to monitor all that. Don't worry, we'll give you a rider, and it, it exempts you from it. It wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. So I don't know how we would ever get a vendor to agree to this. It seems like kind of an exercise in making us feel better, but doesn't really accomplish anything.
I think it's a little bit both.
I second that, Rebecca, too. I mean, most vendors are going to come in and they're not going to be looking to sign anything with CCS. They don't care about CCS. Now, we use a lot of the same vendors, but there may be an oddball one or something, who knows what Scott gets into at his library. So he may have an oddball vendor. And if he's working with that oddball vendor, that vendor may say, CCS, what? I'm not going to, we're not going to get into this. And then he's stuck in a situation where he may not be able to get that oddball service that he really wants, and then what? But I agree, it's not going to really be, it's going to be hard to enforce.
Yes. My only like glimmering light that I would say exists at the end of this weird privacy tunnel is that at least with larger vendors, so I've been having a lot of conversations with the Innovative attorney lately. So they do by default put into all of their contracts that Innovative can have access to all client data for research and development. But we took that out of our contract with them. And now we have this other contract, we took it out with them. And she's like, oh yeah, we track that. Like that's real. If we don't have permission to use your data, like we're not going to. And that's something that they, monitor internally. we did need them to do some testing with our data, and we had to like sign a thing that said they could use this kind of data from this period to this period to like do the testing. But I agree that like smaller vendors would perhaps be a bigger issue. Like they maybe don't have an on-staff attorney who's going to take calls and questions. So it sounds like there's not a lot of appetite from this committee to move forward with this policy. Is that a fair?
You know, the only thing I see that it's good for, and then it's weak, is that if there were ever a breach of information and the patron or the user came after us and said, you let my information out in the world, we could say, we have this piece of paper to prevent that. I mean, remember, the piece of paper could never be enforced, and the piece of paper was inconsistent, and you know, the list of things why this piece of paper isn't so strong, but it is a defense. Like, look, we tried, we said you couldn't do it, So, I mean, that's the singular good reason that I can see for having something, a piece of paper that's signed. And even if it were just CCS, if it were, you promised CCS this, on behalf of its member libraries. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it is some defense. That's all I can think of.
Well, what if we flip it around and we tell the vendor, tell us what your your data use policy is, and if it doesn't meet our standards, then we have the discussion about, getting a rider or striking that clause. I know I don't take every single one of these agreements to my attorney. I don't take any of these to my attorney. Because they're usually a 1 year, renew if we want to kind of thing. But all data, we're all at the mercy of, good grief. Target Corporation can't stop from getting hacked. How are we? Maybe another one of those indemnity things that we just have a blanket thing by accepting, use of anything in the library, you're accepting a certain amount of risk that we can't prevent.
Yes, absolutely. I would hope that you're already having conversations with vendors about how they use the data you provide them, but I understand that that's probably not consistent library to library or even staff member to staff member who's working on, getting a new product. So from my point of view, this is really about like CCS encouraging best practices around data and data privacy, since it's our job to take care of the data. So yes, absolutely. We can write up best practices and say, when you're working with a vendor, here are the questions you should ask. Here's the information you should get. Here are the red flags that, like, if these flags are raised, maybe you don't want to sign the contract as is and get, some alternate language in there. I'm more than happy to do that if that would be viewed as helpful to the members.
What about standards? Like, can CCS create a set of standards that we expect our data merchants, vendors to adhere to?
Yeah, essentially that's what's in the policy, but we can pull those out and make them bulleted and give them to you to have those conversations with your vendors. Yes.
Right, we send it to a vendor and say, can you answer yes to all these, these 5 bullet points or whatever?
Yes, can do.
Okay, sounds good.
We already have a data breach policy too in place where member libraries agree to indemnify, the consortium, right? So, that already exists.
Yes, and we have insurance, but again, it's about doing what we can to prevent it for those vendors who will play nice with us, to encourage them to do so. And it's sort of like a communal pressure. Like, the more libraries that are asking vendors these questions and pushing them on these privacy issues, the more interest they have in making accommodations and being careful. So yeah, I feel like best practices and a checklist and, reminding people to do this work is a nice compromise between an unenforceable, complicated policy and nothing.
Agreed.
I think that would be very beneficial to all of us if we had something like that.
Sounds like a good plan.
We can
Heidi,
make
do you have a cement rabbit in your office?
Yes.
Oh, just wondered.
He was here waiting for me when I joined the team. I also have, I don't know if you'd be able to see it all. I store all of the like Clorox wipes. You see all my boxes? We don't have a lot of storage space, and there it is.
Pardon my digression. I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, right back there. All right. Should we move on to the next topic, Rebecca?
Yes, so this is an area where we don't have a specific policy, and we recently got a ticket that was like, oh, we should probably have some rules about this. Way back in July of 2017, when we had that whole list of decisions that governing board needed to make, one of the things that governing board declined to make a decision on or set a standard for was lost and paid and lost and unpaid recovery options. And I'm going to be a real jerk and put Deborah on the spot. Deborah, can you give like a super brief overview of what the issue is here?
Yes. So to give some long-term context to what feels like many moons ago when we were migrating to Polaris, at that time, CCS presented a series of Polaris setting recommendations to governing board, one of which is standardizing the acceptance of both lost and paid and lost and unpaid materials from patrons. There is a Polaris setting that can automate this acceptance and issue either clear a charge fee that hasn't been paid or issue like a refund or credit to a patron. At that time, CCS had recommended standardizing acceptance of lost, both unpaid and paid materials. I believe it was at 60 days. That motion did not pass at governing board, and we've continued to allow libraries to have and enforce their own policies for accepting lost materials back at the library. Recently, a question came up from a library about their own setting and what was allowed under CCS policy. And we said, well, we don't have a shared policy across all of our libraries. Their practice is to accept returns of lost and unpaid materials for 10 days after the item is declared lost and the patron is billed. After 10 days have passed, they will accept the lost item, but not clear the fee from the patron's account. So they will take the item back, but they will not waive that fee from the patron's account. And so we had some internal discussions at CCS on whether a standard across all of our libraries is something we would want to pursue for, again, acceptance of billed items back, whether those have been paid or whether those bills have been unpaid. Did that answer, Rebecca, provide an overview?
Yes, and in this particular instance, they were asking if they can apply their own policy of that 10-day period to material returned at their library that is owned by another library. So yeah, another library may accept returns and issue, take the charge off their account for 6 months or 3 years, or I mean, not 3 years, but like they may have a much longer period than 10 days. But there was nothing in our policies that says this library has to adhere to the owning library's policy, because that's not really how any of our stuff works. The flag for us was just like 10 days is like so short. Like you get that bill notice, and granted, you've gotten 3 overdue notices before you got your bill notice. Or should we have some sort of standard or at least a window? We started talking about it during quarterly bill, like when we were doing quarterly billing, but then since we are no longer doing that, that sort of fell off the radar. Libraries can do whatever they want. Everyone should make a reasonable effort to recover the items. So this is not something we have a specific recommendation for at this time. We're looking for from the committee, do you think it's worth revisiting now X number of years out? More libraries are fine free, like the situation is just a little bit different. Should we talk about it again and do some research into this?
Yeah. And to just expand on Rebecca, so our policies currently suggest that the returning library, the library the material is returned at, they follow their own local policies. And those would apply regardless of who the item actually belongs to.
I thought the decision to accept a replacement item in lieu of payment is only if it's your item. I thought that was the established procedure.
It's not a replacement item, it's the actual lost item.
The actual last time they paid for it, they find it, they want to bring it back, and now they want their money back.
No, they didn't pay for it. They got billed, they didn't pay for it. 12 days later, they find the item and they bring it in and return it to this library. The library says, thanks for this book back. They take the book and the charge still stays on the patron account.
Because it's too late, so to
But
speak.
it's too late, yes.
Outside the window.
Yeah.
I thought it was only too late if they've actually already paid for the item. Why is it too late? Just
That's
because
just how
they
the
found it late if
library
they haven't
has
paid the
been
bill yet.
policy.
Yeah, each library has their own policy for when they would accept a lost item back, whether again, they have already paid for the item and then they found it, or they were billed, they'd never paid the bill, and then they found the item later. So each library has, like, from what we know, like widely varying practices for what they would do in those situations.
So we have a little bit of a history of trying to even out these differences when we have patrons that can't control where the items come from, or they visit multiple libraries within the consortia. Seems like it would be a candidate for that then. To have a consistent policy.
I agree. I mean, I think so many of our patrons, just assume that since we're in the same shared catalog, that we follow a lot of the same rules. And, if they are getting from other libraries or checking out from other libraries, they're jumping through a lot of hoops. And I would hate for, one of our patrons to return at another library and they get 10 days when we're, 3 months, that's a hard sell. And I'm always of the less arguing patron has, or a circulation staff member has to do with the patron, I'm always on that side. So I would hate to, have to have someone, because they would come back to us about why, they got charged maybe for 10 days over or something. I think consistency would be ideal.
So then the next step would be for us to research what the policies are library to library and see if there are some major trends, et cetera. So this would be something that would be that we'd bring back to the committee next year, and we'd probably get some feedback from the CERT group and database management along the way. But it sounds like this committee is feeling that it's worth looking into again.
Sounds good. Okay, you just lead us through it all, Rebecca, please.
All right, the next one is really just more of a heads up. It's still on my list to update the policies in the governing board policies document about new member application and billing. We do have a new member application. So if we get a query from a member, from a potential member, we have like a form now they can fill out. We do need to update the billing section of the policies just because it's got some weird outdated stuff in it. So we'll be working next year on that with budget and finance and also bylaws and policy just to make sure we're covering all of our bases. So that's just a quick heads up. And then the last one is our new friend Cards for Kids in Illinois. And I have listed Student Success Program here. That's a program that Pinnacle is doing, which I thought was interesting and got some information on. I don't think we need a policy related to Cards for Kids. I think libraries will need to update their own policies, and for the veteran component about non-residents. But I did want to let you know that we'll be adding some patron stat codes to identify cards issued under Cards for Kids, and the veteran program needs a name because it's like, oh, Cards for Kids, and then there's like this little line about our veterans. So we are adding stat codes to help libraries track that moving forward. The Student Success Program, because of Cards for Kids, I think libraries are looking at their cardholder policies and looking at served and unserved areas in their region, et cetera. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of the Student Success Program at Pinnacle. I don't think that it's something that we would want to pursue system-wide, but is it something we'd want to allow if a library wanted to do it? Essentially, through this program, all of the libraries in Pinnacle pursued IGAs with their schools to say that they were going to automatically issue cards to all students in the school district. And then they have a rather complex process by which they get the student registration information from the school and then compare it to the database and then add whatever cards are needed and then like send that information back to the school. So after like getting the information on how the program works, I was like, ooh, this is not something we want to do right now. Like say all libraries are going to do this. But theoretically, if I were to share this program out with governing board from a bylaws and policy standpoint, are there any red flags about if a library wanted to have an agreement like that with a school that you'd be concerned about in our consortial environment?
I have that now. That's what we operate off of. So not that particular program, but I have IGAs with the schools.
Mhm.
And Des Plaines is sort of surrounded by unincorporated areas, which are what I call library dead zones. Nobody's got these areas, and there are a lot of mobile home parks. And so we've already reached out to them, and I have talked to what I'm going to call anonymous elected officials about it. Like, am I doing this legally? Is this okay? And they're like, you want to give cards to kids? I'm like, yeah. They're like, do it. So, if you're elected to office and that's what you tell me to do, that's what I do. But that's what we operate off of now. So any of the surrounding area can come in, and we're just letting it go. So I don't know if that sort of anti-law, I don't mean it like that, but it seems that was the intent of that legislation, the Cards for Kids legislation, that these kids get cards. So, any way you want to do it.
My library district is completely unaffected by this stuff because we have library districts that completely surround us. So we have no one I could possibly sell or give a card to. However, there are some members of the consortia that have a lot of non-residents in their vicinity. And I know a few years back when I was on PPC and we were talking about expanding library card access, and there were some changes that were made to the business card issuing.
Mhm.
And there are some libraries that weren't completely on board because they sell a lot of these cards and they felt that they were going to get maybe kind of inundated by, this increased access to local non-residents. So it doesn't affect me, but I think we should maybe somehow reach out to those who may have a differing opinion on these expansions.
I think, Scott, I know people, for example, I can't remember what meeting I was in, but there were some directors who were very against Cards for Kids, so I think you're right that there's a variety of opinion on it.
Yeah. In general, we'll continue to monitor. They're still working on rulemaking related to Cards for Kids in some capacity. So we'll continue to monitor that and see if anything would affect us system-wide. At this point, we've gotten questions about like, okay, so I give someone a Cards for Kids card. What privileges does that card have? And my interpretation, based on the fact that it's essentially replacing the non-resident fee card, is that they have full privileges. If you pay that non-resident fee, you get full privileges in the library to place holds, do whatever. So if you're getting that non-resident fee card with the fee waived, you have full privileges at the library. So if this committee disagrees with that interpretation, I would like to know that, so I stop telling people, pending, of course, additional information from the state that may contradict that. Scott, you're muted.
You did.
Sorry, I've never quite understood why, because there's a lot of places nationally that are selling library cards. I became aware of this about 6 months ago, that you can just go online and buy these library cards that give you access to the databases. And that's where I'm really confused, because our database costs are based on either library card signups or our potential population that we could be serving. A lot of the vendors still charge you based on your population model. So we've always been told we can't just start issuing cards to the schools, we used to be really worried about just a teacher card because they're going to be sharing the number potentially with, all their kids. So does no one worry about those things anymore? Not everyone's using the hoopla model that you pay as you go. We still pay based on population served. So Springfield doesn't think about any of this, as we know.
I'd recommend making sure your contracts with your vendors have clear definitions of who an authorized user is. And an authorized user is anyone you give a card to, rather than anyone who lives in your service population. Like anyone you legally provide a card to according to state law is your authorized user. So if your contract is clear that like you're the issuing library and you can give a card, I don't think it matters that they set your pricing up one way, for service population, but now these people who aren't counted there can get a card. Like Illinois has specific laws, like you can't just sell a card to anybody. So that's rather limiting for us, that it's not a big explosion of cards, but yeah, define an authorized user in your contract would be, I think, a reasonable solution.
I'm putting that in a note for myself. Thank you.
I think, there was something in the new legislation that said something like, do you want to share your e-resources with anyone in the state or something? And Scott, that's what I was thinking when you were talking, was like, I can't do that. I have a contract with so-and-so saying I can only give it to residents of Des Plaines. Excuse me, I have to jump off, as we all now say, because I'm going to get a vaccination. So
Woo!
anyway, it was a pleasure. Thank you, everyone,
Thank you,
and good
Joe.
luck. And Rebecca, good luck to you. Well, I'll see you next week, right?
Yeah.
All right, but anyway, thank you, and I take my adieu.
Thank you.
So,
Rebecca, that reminds me, as long as I'm on the line here with you, next Wednesday, about a quarter of my staff is getting our second vaccinations. So it's great. And I'll be out directing traffic afterwards for another 5 hours. But it's right, my appointment's at 11:15. So I'll be leaving governing board possibly a little early. So my assistant director will just stay on the line, but then she has to go get hers too. So just a heads up, Fremont may disappear. So let's get all the important votes up front.
That's so exciting, Scott.
Yeah, good luck to everybody. It's not fun, but you feel better after you get at least one under you. I'll tell you that.
Great. Rebecca, does that close the policies discussion? Do you have what you need?
yes, we'll pursue some research on lost and paid and unpaid. We'll keep working on new member application and billing, but vendor data and cards for kids, we're not going to do a policy. Vendor data, we'll look at best practices or like resources for members. We'll add in there, we'll add some language about authorized users too, since that looked like fun for you guys. You're like, oh yeah.
It's gonna be great.
No, that's everything I need. I don't anticipate that this committee needs to meet again this fiscal year. So I'd love to see at least some of you continue on the committee next year for some continuity, but of course, we'll be sending that information out within the next month to get committees set up. So you're welcome to change if you'd like, but I also hope we beef it up a little bit. We got bylaws and policy is like a little baby committee.
I love it. Any other next steps for us, Rebecca? Okay, and just a parliamentary question. I like to do I'm going to adjourn unless anyone doesn't want to, but do you need a first and a second? Okay. All right, so unless there are any objections, we're going to adjourn the meeting at 11:31 a.m. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.